Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. So I'm sure it's no news to anyone watching this video that most of the land on Earth has already been claimed by one of the roughly 195 UN member states. There's one pretty notable exception, but besides that, every single piece of land on Earth is either owned by a country or it's owned indirectly by an autonomous region or sub-region or something along those lines, but one of these countries owns every piece of land, which means if you want to start a new country, you can't just decide, hey, I'm going to find an island, I'm going to plant a flag on it, and I'm going to call it my new country. No, instead what you need to do is you need to carve it up from an existing country, and although there are a few ways you can do that, the most common 21st century way is to hold an independence referendum. In 2017, we had the South is My Country movement in the south of Brazil, where there was a referendum held, and although it had a 96% yes rate, it was on 1.7% of the vote, which is not necessarily enough to become an independent country. And we also had a 2018 New Caledonian independence referendum, where New Caledonia, an overseas region of France, voted to become independent from France and go their own way. However, 56% of voters actually did reject that by a margin of about 18,000 votes. And so because of this, we did not see a brand new country form in either 2017 or 2018. But what if I said that just in the next year alone, we have 3 independence referendums planned? By the way, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. We'll talk more about them later. 3 potential new countries could be formed or could start forming over the course of just the next year, and that's something I find exciting because instead of 195 countries, we could have 198 or 197 if you don't count the Palestinian territories, or 199 if you do count them and you also count Taiwan. Who knows what you want to do? It's a wacky world we live in, right? But speaking of wacky world, let's talk about the South Pacific region, because honestly, when it comes to most regions of Earth, it's pretty easy to see who owns what, with the exceptions being like Greenland and other outer seas territories, but for the most part it's really easy until you get to this region of the world where there are so many islands that are really tricky to see on a map, especially if it's a map like this. It's like, what is going on right here? Where are the countries at? There are a lot of countries in Oceania and the kind of ocean area that are very loosely populated, and a lot of these countries have some form of independence movement. The first of which we're going to talk about is Papua New Guinea. So Papua New Guinea is a really interesting colonial possession to talk about, because if you look at these islands right here, there's an island called New Britain, an island called New Ireland, and then obviously you'll know that Papua New Guinea was actually an Australian colony until 1975, if I'm not mistaken. So it's an Australian colony with a lot of things named after Britain, Ireland, and also there's the Bismarck Sea because it was formerly a German colony of German New Guinea, except German New Guinea bought a lot of its possessions from Spain, and also it's only half of the island Guinea, the rest of which is owned by Indonesia, a former Dutch colony, and basically this whole region gets really confusing when it comes to the colonization of it all. So let's just kind of keep things simple and say that, yeah, there's a country called Papua New Guinea, and it's got a lot of linguistic diversity, a lot of diversity in the in terms of pretty much everything else about it. But one of the most interesting parts of this country is Bougainville Island. So Bougainville Island has about 250,000 people living there, compared to Papua New Guinea's 8 million. So it's a small proportion of the overall population, but it's very notably not kind of associated with the rest as closely as you could associate it with another sovereign state, the Solomon Islands. So the Solomon Islands are a former British territory it's one of those concerning countries. Whenever you Google it, you're like, oh, is that can't be a good thing. No offense, Solomon Islands. I mean, not many of them are watching this video. Offense, Solomon Islands. Yeah, I'm concerned at the things you're seeing on screen right now. These are not good things for the Solomon Islands to be doing. Anyway, so Solomon Islands is, actually closer to them, and part of the geographic Solomon Islands chain is the Bougainville Island, because partially the geography, partially the culture, and partially just the history, Bougainville has always wanted to go independent, and since Papua New Guinea's independence in 1975, they've been kind of wanting it, and by wanting it, I mean guerrilla warfare, campaigns to try and get some independence. And the easy way to settle guerrilla warfare campaigns and to settle civil wars that basically erupted is like, hey, what if we put it to a vote instead? So what we're going to see happen is in 2019, Bougainville is going to be holding a referendum, actually just 3 weeks from this video going up, a little less, 3 weeks from this video being recorded, because somewhere between the 23rd of November and the 7th of December, there will be, a lot of voting done across the entire autonomous region of Bougainville, and then the votes will come in, and it will be, decided as to whether the country goes independent. What I find is really interesting, though, just as a quick little aside here, is that one of the people helping out with the referendum is actually the former Prime Minister, but I can't say the Irish word for it, I'm sorry, has actually come in to the island to help out specifically, and the Australians kind of have assumed it's going independent for quite some time. They even sent like a mission over there to be like, let's get ready for independence, and then they realized, hey, that's not a thing you should do under international law. But yeah, Bougainville Bougainville is basically a very linguistically diverse place. Even within itself, it's a very diverse place in terms of everything. It's divided into lots of different regions that you can see on screen right now. And there's this very interesting thing to me that they actually have their own bridge language. It's called like Tok Pisin, and as well as having a bridge language of their own, because it's part of Papua New Guinea, and they have their whole own set of languages because the linguistics of this entire area are very confusing. Basically, English is actually the kind of language that is used as the common language of business and politics and law and stuff, and I find that fascinating that an island with a French name, Bougainville, you might guess, named after the French explorer Bougainville, who's named after somewhere indirectly a town named Bougainville in France. Basically, you know, a French island in an otherwise English but also German but also Spanish but with Dutch neighbor colony is also using English as the root language because that's the the bridge language, because that's the wonderful thing that can do. And that's right, this video is also turning into English propaganda. That's right, I speak it and I want you to speak it if you I mean, I'd say I want you to speak it. I think it's cool if you speak it, and yeah, there you go. So Cat's linguistic lingual state, propaganda continues. But yeah, in 2019, we're going to see what happens there. I'm super curious. I think this one's almost certainly going to go as a yes, personally. But, you know, who knows? Campaigning. It's a very small population on the island, about, again, 250,000 people. And of those 250,000 people, only 200,000 are registered to vote or of voting age. And because of that, and because not even all of those will vote, we're talking about tens of thousands of people, and realistically single thousands of people that will sway this vote. And yeah, it's either going to be like a heavy yes or a very slight no. I imagine the yes will happen, and I imagine that Bougainville will start to become an independent country, confusing the region a little bit more, because again, look at all the countries. Can you work out what territory they own? Well, if you can't, well, here's the problem with our next country, because the Federated States of Micronesia prove one of the problems with maps as we kind of know them, because again, when you picture a map, you know, if we click on Mongolia, this is Google Maps, which I use for these videos, I'm sure you all know by now, but Mongolia has very clear borders, no outer, like no exclaves, no outer sea territories, no like, oh yeah, we own this part of the other side of the world, like, New Caledonia from earlier. Mongolia is a pretty simple country because it just has a lot of territory in one place. Even the Solomon Islands, at least the islands are big and close together, but when we go to the Federated States of Micronesia, it's one of the hardest countries to get a grip on, because you're like, so it's there and it's there, but no, it's in a lot of places. So here is the best map I can find to kind of help you understand the region. Here are all the different regions, kind of grouped by the sea, or if you just want to see the Federated States of Micronesia, they own a lot of different islands that are grouped into 4 major different states, and one of those states is Chuuk. There's also Yap, which wants independence, but not quite as badly as Chuuk does. So there is there's the region of Chuuk, which is holding a referendum on their independence in 2020, the 2020 Chuukese independence referendum. And the interesting thing about this referendum is the reasons for it are really hard to find. Again, I've been diving into it because I'm like, obviously, independence always comes down to, we would like autonomy, we want to not be part of the larger state anymore, and be our own state. However, the Federated States of Micronesia is one of the lightest populated countries on Earth. Only 100,000 people live in, again, across all of these islands right here, only have 100,000 people between them. And of those 100,000, approximately, 50,000 live in Chuuk, which is this little island chain right here. So it's the most populated part of the entire thing. It's got a loose majority of the population, but yet Chuuk kind of wants to have a slightly different foreign policy than the rest of it. Except it's very vaguely defined. Again, I've been trying to find any proper reasoning, and their reasoning is that because Chuuk is in a free association with America, America provides defense and provides different financial support in exchange for they provide defense and financial support, which is, America's favorite way to to be friendly with the world, and that's a polite way to put it. And yeah, because of that, they want to change the US Compact Agreement, and they want to make it more workable and separate. But again, I can't find any actual details of the policy besides we want to be closer in some ways, except more independent, because independence is what we want, but also the youths don't seem to want it because they like the idea of the current agreement with the US because they get to move there. There's a lot of weird countries that have this sort of agreement, and yeah, Chuuk and the Federated States of Micronesia, confusing country, but regardless of how confusing it is, they're holding a referendum. And one of the things I found to be so fascinating was that even though there isn't really a good case for it, internationally speaking, they've argued that under international law, because Kosovo became independent without any real legal international status. Again, I agree it's an independent country, but recognizing it as an independent country causes all sorts of issues, even in the South Pacific, just like this. So boom, There you go. You might think, how can the Balkans affect literally some islands in the middle of the ocean? But now you know the Balkans, their influence in terms of making people fight and have questionable legal realities is a thing right there. So with that said, let's move on from Chuk to the final independence referendum that is currently scheduled and currently has a pretty fixed date, because this one might surprise you. It's in the south, again, it's all in the it's in the Oceania, South Pacific region, but there might be a new country of New Caledonia. And I know what you're thinking, Toycat. 2018 is not the future. You might wish it was the future, but sadly time is linear and we're all slowly marching towards death, and therefore 2018 won't happen again unless we get some miracles happening on that front. And you know what? Although that's wonderful, although we are slowly marching towards death, the great thing is you look at this and you see, wait a minute, 2020 New Caledonia independence referendum. So I did have to confirm, like, what is actually going on right here. And the explanation is that because there was some unrest because the native Kanak people don't like being a part of France, and New Caledonia is a full-on part of France. Like, they have the French president, they're not even just like, because the EU, over here, there are things owned by EU countries, not part of the EU, like Greenland or some British overseas territories, but there are also parts of the EU, there are things owned by EU countries that are also part of the EU, and one of those parts is New Caledonia, which is very confusing on a whole set of different levels to me. They vote in the European Parliament. Do they know what Europe is? Do they know what they're voting for? Whatever. So New Caledonia is a part of France, and they're holding a referendum because, again, there's kind of this divide between the colonial rulers and also the people who benefit from the colonial rulers and the native Kanak people who have very different, different is a good way to put it, cultures, beliefs, and customs. In fact, there's a lot of pressure on other countries to put France under pressure to actually kind of stop some of the customary things, because by giving independence to the natives in terms of different law systems, there's a lot of barbaric things that you could argue happen in the region. Again, I'm trying not to dive too much into the what's going on with New Caledonia. Just know that they have a very different sets of people there, and also just know that they're holding a referendum in 2020. I imagine the results will be the same unless some crazy campaigning happens, but the crazy bit is if they have another third majority in Parliament, they can hold another one in 2022. So yeah, the third country, I'd say the least likely one to go independent, is actually New Caledonia, and then they have they have another chance of going independent in 2022, which means that all it takes is like one big international event involving this place, one big thing that swings people's minds, and we'll see a New Caledonia, which would be another great country for Australia to have nearby, because, right now, Papua New Guinea is, like, kind of close, and, hey, yeah, really, the big gainer from all of this is Australia, because if you live in Australia, it's so hard to travel to new countries, because you have, like, a few islands nearby, and that's it. Australia's about to gain 3 new neighbours, and good on you, Australia, good on you, I guess is the point of this video. I don't know if that's meant to be the point of it. But no, yeah, the point of independence is really interesting to me because a lot of countries have regions gunning to be autonomous. Think about Catalonia in Spain. That's another referendum example that wasn't fully legal, but it's something that happened. Think about Scotland in the UK. We held a referendum, right? Wasn't that a thing? When you think about these referendums and you think about the idea of regions going autonomous from bigger things, it creates this internal struggle in my mind that, like, because, a lot of people try to put nationalism as a right-wing thing, but also it's a very left-wing thing, especially in Scotland and Catalonia. So when you take these concepts and you kind of wonder, like, so what is the benefit of having smaller units versus bigger units? And the answer is, like, well, bigger units, the economic benefits are always bigger. That's the point of big trading blocks, for example. And if the answer is, if you think that smaller units are always better, then shouldn't you go down to, like, super, super small? Shouldn't, I don't know, the town of Birmingham be independent? The town of Cannock go independent, because that would be the most direct way for people to rule it. And I think what it really is like, the larger a block is always a better one if it's competently ruled. But when a block that you're a part of isn't competently ruled, take, for example, a union of a European variety, not naming any names, if you feel like it's incompetently ruled at least, and things are pushed through against your interests, whatever your group may be, I would, for instance, I like my city. I would say Londoner might be a good adjective for me. If things are against the interests of my thing, whether it be on the country level, whether it be on the sovereign state level, whether it be on the, the world level or whatever, you're going to feel a little bit cheated by the world, the continent, the country, the sovereign state, the city even when it's against your interests. There's so many micro groups that make these larger things, and independence referendums are really just a way to say, hey, stop fighting over it. Here's an official thing in words and votes. Let's see where the people's will lies. But I don't think everywhere ever should have a referendum. I don't think that, I know, let's take an example. I don't think that the state of Mato Grosso should go independent from Brazil, should hold a referendum from Brazil, because one, referendums are a big process, but also I just feel like diluting the power of a sovereign state by creating more and more and more sovereign states, we're diluting the power of them in a way that I don't think is positive for the future outcome of the world. I think that the more countries we have is actually not necessarily a good thing, besides people like me who'd like to name all the countries, which, would you like to see a video where I see if I can name every country, and then we call me a racist for all the countries that I can't name? I think that's a great idea. Let me know in the comments down below, but for now, this video's gone on too long, and you've got things to do, I've got things to do. It's a busy week, right? Probably. Anyway, right now, I have an announcement, or not an announcement, but I'm always curious about people's thoughts, and like, I tell people where I'm going like a couple weeks in advance. I am going to Utah for the first time, Salt Lake City, for a couple of days in the end of this month. I think it's actually December, but I'm going to... Actually, you know, I can celebrate the Bougainville independence referendum and see how that's going while I'm in Salt Lake. It's not actually the city, it's like there's ski resorts just outside of it. If you live in Utah, which you probably don't, because that's my assumption at least. If you live in Utah, Salt Lake City, any of those places, give me some wacky recommendations of like things I can do without being converted to a new religion. Actually, you know what? Recommend that too. Sure, why not? But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Salt Lake City, because again, I've got a pretty fun trip. I'll probably show it on this channel somewhere, or the third channel, which you can check out if you search Andrew Andrews for some reason. So yeah, there you go. Self-promo, independence referendums, travel plans. This video's got everything. So this video is sponsored by Skillshare. The Skillshare is obviously a really cool thing when you get sponsored by them because, you know, they sponsor everything on YouTube, and if you're part of everything, you know you're doing pretty cool. But more seriously, Skillshare is actually a website that allows you to learn new skills. Would you guess that? It's a website where they share skills with you. Do you want to learn about how to go viral? Of course you do. Do you want to learn about the fundamentals of DSLR photography? Do you want to learn how to be a better entrepreneur, how to edit, how to do any of these major skills that take time to learn? All these different skills that you might think to yourself, like, how would you even begin? Skillshare's got you covered with easy, bite-sized, miniature courses that you can, take down into little bits and learn that way. I find this to be so handy because sometimes you don't want to be like, I'm going to sit down and do something productive for half an hour. That's a big commitment. Sit down, do something productive for 2 minutes, then another 2 minutes, then another 3 minutes. That's pretty easy, and that's why I recommend Skillshare. And also, you might think, oh no, it's expensive though. No, you can get the first 2 months for free at the link down below. It's no longer first 500 people get the first 2 months for free. Everyone gets 2 months for free, and that is something I can do for you, or that Skillshare can do for you, and that I can do for Skillshare, and then Skillshare can do things for me, which is how sponsorships work. It's a wonderful thing that I hope you appreciate, and if you appreciate this video, then make sure to leave it and never come back. Goodbye.